Eastern and 1 p.m. Central, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Morgan Arwood, and I'm Membership Director for MRCA. Thank you so much for being here this week. Today, we've got MRCA's General Counsel and OSHA Defense Attorney Gary Aumann of Aumann, Mahan, and Furry to discuss this week's topic of best practices for training documentation. Training without documentation is like fishing without a license. The act of proper documentation of the training provided to your crews can make the difference between a willful violation or an employee misconduct when OSHA comes a-calling. I have two quick things before Gary gets started. First, we want to be sure that you are maximizing your membership benefits. On our website, www.mrca.org, under the Members Only tab, is a tab called Sharp Plus Safety. Here you can find our Sharp Plus Resources Library. You have access to all of MRCA's monthly meetings and toolbox talks. If your company is just starting down the road to creating a safety culture, this is an easy first step. These toolbox talks are designed to be painlessly administered at the job site and include sign-off sheets for documentation. You already get set topics sent to your email inbox each month, but sometimes a different topic makes more sense than the one provided. And we encourage you to use the website to tailor your trainings. Please reach out to me if you need access to your members only profile on our website, or if you need help navigating to the toolbox talks. Last thing I have is that last week, Frank with Belden asked a great question, and I wanted to address it during today's webinar for everyone. His question was, when do we apply for the Safety Award? The Safety Committee is meeting this week, actually, to finalize this year's questions for the Safety Award program. The timeline at present is that we will roll out the application process on April 2nd of 2021 with a deadline of August 15th, 2021 for submission. This will give you about 4 months to complete the application. Here's a hint. If you start early, you can reach out to Gary with any questions you have about proper policy on a particular topic before finalizing your submission. So that's all I have for now, except to sincerely thank you all for being here today. And with that, I will hand it over to Gary. Gary?
Thank you, Morgan. And everybody, no promises that I'll give you the right answers, though, if you reach out to me early.
He promises.
Okay. Today, we're really talking about effective safety training and documentation and or record keeping. But as the pastor of the church that I go to just before he retired, but like he used to like to say before he began his message on a Sunday morning, before I tell you what I've come to tell you, I've got 2 or 3 other things to tell you. And I'm no different than he is. In fact, maybe I learned from him, because I do have 2 things I want to tell you before we get into this other material. And actually, some of them are related, or one of them is definitely related to the material that we'll be talking about today. And that is that we're talking about effective training. And for those of you who question whether or not you have to engage in effective training, 29 Code of Federal Regulations, section 1926.21 requires that you have a training program and train your employees. Now, I know if you read that standard, you're going to say, well, Aumann's taking a lot of literary license with what's really said there. That is the standard, though, that OSHA uses when they come out to a job site and ask to see a safety program in a construction setting, and you don't have one. That's what the section they will cite you under for not having a program, because it's a very general section that they interpret very broadly. And it's something you need to pay attention with. And one of the things we're going to be talking about, because Morgan mentioned it, are types of training, are the toolbox talks. And she said, toolbox talks which you can painfully administer at your job site. You also should remember the idea of the toolbox talk is to avoid pain on the job site. I know that's a play on words, but not only are they easy to administer, but the idea is to get your employees in the mindset so they avoid engaging in activities that can cause them pain or injuries. Now, the only other thing I want to mention to you before we get into the material, and again, this relates, it was last week because we had a delay the start of the overall program. Last week we did the safety culture, and Dermot of Langer Roofing, and I'm not sure Dermot, whether it's Dermot or Dermot, but Dermot of Langer Roofing raised a question about cleaning snow off of roofs. And at that time, I answered the question quite probably more lengthy than he expected. But Morgan and I have talked about this in the ensuing few days. And there are two ways to look at this. First of all, if you are engaged in a roofing project, a roofing contract, you're either engaged in tear off or you're engaged in installation of new roofing material. And you have to clear the roof of snow in connection with that. I think you could safely argue you are engaged in roofing work when you are clearing the snow under that circumstance. But if any of you have a side light this time of the year to go out to your customers, or maybe you even advertise in a telephone book or wherever people advertise nowadays, online, on social media, because you have the equipment and you have everything there, we'll come out, if you need it, we'll come out to your shop, your store, whatever, your home, and we will clear snow off your roof. If you're going out to do, and that's what you're doing, that's the purpose of your being on the site. You are not doing roofing work when you are clearing the snow off the roof under that circumstance. You are now engaged in almost maintenance work, which brings you under 1910, not 1926. So again, I may be going beyond what some of you are familiar with, and judging by some of the safety applications I graded this past year, when you're doing roofing work, you're covered by the construction industry standards, which are 1926. When you're engaged in repair work, even roofing repair work, let's say you have residential and you're going out to replace some shingles, literally you might come under 1910 because it's maintenance. Or if you go up to a roof to do maintenance work, replace the flashing around a chimney or something like that, or do something around a penthouse on a low sloped roof, that probably is maintenance, which very well could bring you under 1910, which has its own fall protection standard. But anyway, getting back to the snow cleanup, be aware of what you're doing and be sure you're providing adequate fall protection. And the reason I raise this whole thing is because if you're doing that type of non-roofing work, you probably cannot use warning lines and safety monitors as a means of fall protection. And you probably will get cited by OSHA if that's what they observe you doing, because they will say, well, if an employee is pushing snow towards the edge of the roof without a parapet wall, without any kind of guardrail, and he or she are just pushing it with a hand push snow plow kind of thing, and they slip on the roof, especially if it's a metal roof or something along those lines, they could slide off the roof. They could slide right under the warning line, and no safety monitor is going to be able to stop them. So under those circumstances, be sure your people are wearing fall protection. Okay. And that should be part of your training protocol too. That's how I related it. Okay, moving on to the slides for today. So first of all, first question, we're going to talk about a few things concerning your training program initially. The first question is, and by the way, I borrowed these slides from a friendly area director I know very well, Ken Montgomery down in Southwest Ohio. These are actually the OSHA slides when they talk to people about training. And the question they ask is, do you have a safety training program? And is your program effective? Do you have a concern for your employees? Reduce human costs, reduce economic costs, and it's the law, as I've already mentioned to you. You have to have a training program. What does it take? The first thing you've got to have is a safety program. You got to have that safety program. You have to have something about which you're going to train your employees. And this is the first part of safety training documentation, a documented safety program. A little plug for the MRCA. The safety committee is just now reviewing a safety manual template that my office has prepared for the MRCA, which will be available I'm assuming within the next couple of months after the safety committee has completed its review. The idea is to give you a basic very detailed guideline. The template's 150 pages long or something like that. It's not intended for you just to pop your company name in there, but to cherry pick those parts of the template that apply to the kind of work you're doing. There's your safety program. You have to have a safety program that fits your company. Please do not just print out the OSHA construction standards or something like that. OSHA's not going to consider that a safety program. And there's no way you're going to train your employees on all of that. But if it's in the safety program, it should be part of your training program. You need to have an effective safety orientation. That's the first time you get new employees together when you're going to take that first opportunity to train them. Safety orientation. Mentoring, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I find that I've got several of my construction industry clients, some very large ones, who really like the mentoring program. When an employee comes out of safety orientation, and by the way, both union and non-union contractors use this concept, they are assigned an experienced employee, experienced with that company. So that employee is familiar with the safety rules and guidelines of that company, to work with them and sort of buddy up with them for the first, depending on how quickly they appear to learn, week. Some of them go for a month and some 2 months. Weekly toolbox talks, Morgan mentioned that. We'll talk more about that and how to document them. Daily safety job briefings. This is something most contractors don't seem to really understand how to do them or why they're important. They are so very important. I think pre-task planning, job safety analysis, things like that. We're going to talk about those. And then this last bullet, something most people miss. You need to retrain your employees on a crew before they get on that new job. You know, you have employees who've been working on, you've got a crew that's been working on a re-roof of a small strip mall. Maybe it's 50, 75 squares. And that's what they've been doing. And now you're finished with that project, and now they're going to move and they're going to re-roof a Walmart or a Target or something along those lines, a much larger roof, maybe a whole different approach. That crew should be trained before they go on that project. They've been trained, but train them with what you expect them to do on that project. And in some cases, you may have to comply with the owner's own training or safety requirements. You've got to train your people with regards to those. Safety orientation, the beginning. This is the order of preference, not only by me, but by OSHA. One-on-one plus hands-on training is the best. Lectures are number 2. Not quite as good as one-on-one, but close. Video and computers are number 3. They're probably 2.5 if you have somebody in the room with the employees who are using the computer or watching the videos to answer questions as they go. And of course, OSHA expects that you will have that, and that's part of the documentation, identifying that individual. Reading the safety manual is the last. Handing somebody a copy of your 25-page safety manual, say, read this, come back in tomorrow morning, and indicate that, sign off on this sheet that indicates you've read it and you're familiar with it, and then I'll put you to work. Think about it, folks. How many of you or how many of the people you hire would not sign off on that form that next morning, even though they went home that night and watched the Super Bowl or watched a basketball game or whatever? No more read that safety manual than than I'm president of the United States, which I don't ever want to be and wouldn't take the job if somebody paid me a lot to take it. But they're going to sign that because they want to go to work. So that is the least effective means of training. Adults learn better when activities and tasks are structured and clearly related to specific subjects. You relate the safety rules to specific tasks the employee is going to do when he or she are actually working. Through problem-solving instructional methods. For example, some people like to teach part of their hazard recognition is to show employees slides or give them pictures and say, okay, what are the hazards in this setting? Now, I'm on the state of Washington's website because I do OSHA defense work out there. And they actually do have a quiz that they put out about once every 3 or 4 weeks. And it's, can you find the safety violations on a picture? And theirs are very difficult. Theirs are very obscure. I wouldn't suggest you do the same thing, but that's another idea with regards to training. Real or model experiences where you actually describe a real project. You take the learning process, and this all has to be documented. In other words, this isn't something you dream up as you're sitting down getting ready to lecture your employees or train your employees, but these are things you've got in the notes that are part of your training program, the documented safety training program, where you're actually going to take the time and describe something, a situation on a prior job site. This is what real life, this actually happened on a prior job site. We actually set up a ladder and we didn't extend it 3 feet above. The employees on the job site didn't extend it the necessary 3 feet. And when one of the employees came over to the ladder to get down the ladder, and you all recognize, of course, that 3-foot distance is not as much for stability as it is to provide a handhold or something for the employee to stabilize himself or herself before they step onto that ladder. And when the employee had to bend down to grab hold of that handhold, he lost his balance and fell off the roof. This is why the ladders have to be 3 feet above the eave or the edge of the level we're reaching. So that's a real or model experience. Use those sorts of things. Now, if it's something that actually happened in your company, be careful how you document it. Be careful about admissions, because when you document something like that, even in a training context, it is a discoverable document. So once again, just be careful how you put that together. Okay, methods of instruction. I find these to be very interesting. Recall, 3 hours and 3 days. If you tell somebody something, they'll remember for 70% will remember for 3 hours, 10% for 3 days of that entire 100% that were there. Showing, 72% will remember for 3 hours, 20% for 3 days. But if you tell it and show it, look at the difference. If I'm showing it and telling it, that's why use slides of actual roof situations or short videos, clips of what's going on the roof as you're training. That puts you down into telling and showing. Or actually demonstrate, like you're trying to train somebody to put on their safety harness. Don't just hold up the harness, say, here's a harness, this is what you got to wear. Be sure you tighten it up, put one leg in each leg hole first, and then pull it up over your shoulder. However you do it, show them how it's done and tell them. They'll remember it a lot better. And these, just a list of things. And by the way, these slides, as Morgan mentioned, will be available on the job site, on the website. So you can go back and look at these if I move through some of these a little more quickly than you cared that I should. But people remember what they read, what they hear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing, most people remember what they do. Think about it. If I give you instructions to get to my office over the telephone, are you going to remember those instructions if you don't write them down better when you leave wherever you are to come to my office than if I actually show you and send you a link with a movable map and actually show you all the turns you take and everything else? So you get 10% what they read, 20%, 30, 40, 50, 70, and 90% remember what they do. Okay, safety orientation. These are the things you want to cover. Now, I'm covering some of this stuff and some of this material. And some of you may be saying to yourself, well, this is pretty basic material. I'm telling you, as I review the applications for the MRCA Elite Safety Award, Contractor Safety Awards, as basic as many of us think this sort of thing is, very few people seem to understand it and include it. I just got done drafting a letter on one of the applications I graded for the 2020 grading season. Of course, the recognition levels have already been reported. I'm now in the process of doing the letters. And as I went back over the letter, I asked myself, why did I give that company as high a score as I did? Because they totally missed this. They didn't indicate the content of what they include in their orientation training. Many of you who've taken that, have applied for the award, when you see that question and you see the part that says, list the topics you cover, that's part of the documentation. That's something you need to document. You need a list of the topics you're going to cover. Think about if you've ever taken the OSHA 10-hour or the OSHA 30-hour class. When you sign up for it, you see all the 10 different topics they're going to cover in the OSHA 10, or the 30 hours of topics they're going to cover in the OSHA 30. Now, I know we're recording this, but I'll say it and I will stand by it. I do not feel that saying to me or saying to anyone, oh, all my people have the OSHA 10, is ever as good as, say, a good safety orientation program, toolbox talks, monthly safety meetings, daily safety job briefings. An OSHA 10 or an OSHA 30, neither one of them will ever replace training that you do for your employees. So if you tell me that we just require that everybody we hire have the OSHA 10-hour class, and then we spend an hour or half an hour going over our safety rules with them and send them out to the job site, if I'm scoring that, that's probably a 5, maybe a 6 out of 10 points. That tells me you don't really give a rip about it. Don't later on then tell me you've got a strong safety culture, because if that's all the care you have about safety orientation, you're not demonstrating that you have a strong safety culture. Merely accepting the fact that I've been through an OSHA 10-hour class when you don't know what even the topics were in that, and I probably don't remember it because I took it 10 years ago, and that's all you require because I say, yes, I had it, and you say, great, you're trained, let me just cover a couple of high points for you, and we'll send you out to work. Same thing with the OSHA 30. And don't forget, neither of those programs are typically designed for roofing contractors or general contractors, more so for generals than for roofing contractors, or mechanicals or any other trade. They're not trade specific. They're usually fairly generic. So have a great safety orientation program. And for documentation, we'll talk more about documentation a little bit down the road this afternoon. But be sure that documentation is a list of all the topics you cover. The other thing you need to have in your safety orientation documentation is you need to identify the person or people who present the material to your employees. And you should also identify the method you use to cover that material. And there's nothing wrong. If you remember going back a few slides, the lecture format is not a bad format. It's one of the better formats to educate people. Yes, lecturing and showing is better, but lecturing is better than computer-based. It's better than videotapes, and it's better than having them read your safety manual. And think, videotapes, okay, they're fine, but people's attention spans tend to wander. And if I'm sitting and there's nobody in the room with me, and I'm sitting in front of a flat screen TV watching a videotape or a DVD, how do you know I'm not sending text messages to my wife or my girlfriend? And no, I don't have both. I just have a wife or girlfriend. Or if I'm playing a game on my smartphone, you don't know whether I'm doing that or if I'm paying attention to what's on the screen. There has to be a post-orientation test, and it's got to be pass-fail, and that all needs to be documented. Now, somebody asked me, well, suppose I have a 70% pass. If you get 70% correct on the post-orientation test, and I send you out onto the job site, is that good enough? And my response is, well, if it's good enough for you, if you're satisfied that if I'm aware of the safety rules that apply to what I'm doing and the safety guidelines, I call them safety rules, but they are rules, but they're intended to protect the employee. If I'm aware of 70% of those and you're my employer and you're satisfied that I don't understand at all 30%, like you asked me, one of the questions, let's say, is, okay, you are required to have fall protection when you're working 4 feet above the ground, 6 feet above the ground, 20 feet above the ground, or 50 feet above the ground. And I check 50 as the correct answer, or I should say more than 50 feet or higher, 20 feet or higher, 6 feet or higher, 4 feet or higher. And I get that wrong. And if you're okay with that I don't think I need fall protection until I'm at least 50 feet up, okay. Now, OSHA's not going to be happy with it in an OSHA case, but as I mentioned last week, and I mention this whenever I speak, I am concerned about the safety of your employees more than I'm concerned actually about complying with OSHA. Yes, complying with OSHA is important, but I'm primarily concerned about the safety of your employees. Think about that when you're doing a pass-fail test. So 90% is better than anything else, but anyway, you need to do the post-injury test. Be sure your orientation covers general duty clause topics such as heat and cold illness prevention, distracted driving and working, discuss your safety enforcement program, cover anti-retaliation and injury reporting, that you expect your employees to report their injuries. They will not be retaliated against for doing that, and hazard recognition training. Okay. Again, do as much hands-on as possible. Be as interactive as possible. Anything you can do in that orientation program, any section of it that you can do hands-on or interactive where the person's actually working with you together. If you're a smaller contractor and you're a one-on-one or one-on-two person training where you can do interactive training, that's great. Always test, all in caps here. Keep records, detailed records. As Morgan mentioned, and I mention all the time, and as far as OSHA is concerned, if it's not recorded, it didn't happen. I don't care how many times you tell an OSHA compliance officer, yes, I train all my employees. They all go through safety orientation. If they don't remember it, your employee doesn't remember what was covered or doesn't remember the orientation itself, it didn't happen if you don't have a record. I recently got done successfully defending a case for a client out in the state of Washington, a very large contractor. This is probably the most safety conscious client I have in construction. And yet when the OSHA compliance officer interviewed two gentlemen on this is an asbestos abatement project, he interviewed them and asked them about, now when you came to work for ABC Company, did you go through safety orientation? Now one of those guys had been hired 6 months prior to the inspection. The other guy had been hired 3 years prior to the inspection. And both of them said, well, I think I had safety orientation, but I sure don't remember it. Now, what that told me was, number one, it wasn't interactive, or they probably would have remembered it. It was in fact video and computer-based training. And fortunately, my client had the documentation and showed that the employees signed off on each part of that training. For example, just quickly going back here, these are just 4 points. General duty clause, discuss your safety enforcement, et cetera. Think about all the different subjects, all the different topics. But my client had the employee sign off on each one of these. After they completed a segment on safety enforcement, the employee initialed on his schedule that had been completed. And of course, that was all part of the test then. And they had a pass-fail situation, and the employees passed the test, and we could produce the tests. My client, we were able to produce the tests, so we were able to show that they were effectively trained. And actually, I had to take that to hearing because in the state of Washington does not negotiate settlement. They don't reclassify. And we asked to have that either reduced to an other than serious out there, which is a general, they call it a general, or vacated. And the Washington OSHA, WSHA, refused to do either. So we had to take it to hearing. We went to trial. The judge vacated the citation altogether. So we got a good result, but it's only because we had the documentation. Okay.
Quick question, Gary.
Yeah.
It's Jason with Alpha Roofing. How long do you have to keep those records for those employees?
As long as the employee works for you.
So once they are gone, then you can destroy those?
Well, I recommend that you keep them for 5 years after the employee leaves your employ. And I do that for this reason. That's solely for a defensive measure to an OSHA site, an OSHA inspection. So OSHA can't accuse you of just having started this program or something. You can show, no, this is an ongoing program. You keep those historic records. So I suggest, but you're okay. You're going to be okay. It's just going to be a little harder to prove things if you don't have some historic records, as long as you have the records for every employee who's with you on an active basis. But if you're a union contractor, you send them back to the hall because the project's finished and they come back to you a year later. Are you going to put them through the orientation again? Are you going to rely on the first orientation? That's an issue. I suggest you have a second type of orientation for union employees who come back. Anybody who comes back to work for you within 12 months of having been sent back to the hall, you can put them through the abbreviated orientation as long as you have the records of the initial orientation. The best still is the full orientation, but I understand there's also a time constraint, things you have to deal with that way too. So, but as long as they work for you plus 5 years after they leave you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. How effective is your training? These are ways of measuring training. I hope to heaven none of you have any fatalities that you ever have to look at and say, well, I guess we didn't train them very effectively on the use of fall protection. But those are ways of monitoring. Look at your EMR rate in workers' compensation. If your EMR rate's under 1, look at the types of injuries. Look at your OSHA 300, the types of injuries you have listed. Those are good ways to determine not only have I effectively trained, but is there a trend in my OSHA 300s? I may need to change or take my training up a notch in this particular area. Let's say it's working with a kettle or working around the kettle, or maybe it's CERTA torch apply training. I notice I've got quite a few burn type injuries. Maybe I need to re-emphasize my training in that area because that's where those would typically come from, that sort of thing. And then the other thing are the daily safety audits. I just got done dictating a letter in a case where the employer said, well, we have our safety consultant and they periodically audit our job sites. And my comment was, that's not enough. You should do your foreman or crew leader. If they're a leader, I use that term, crew leader or foreman, they should be capable of doing a simple safety audit. And that's, just a couple of things like whatever, let's say you require your employees to wear safety glasses, hard hats, and personal fall arrest systems. That abbreviated safety audit could just be those 3 points. Or ladders, maybe include a ladder set up. Is the ladder tied off and is it 3 feet above the eave? Just a couple, maybe 5 or 6 total points, but your foreman should pull that out maybe twice a day, random, unannounced, and just do the checklist. And a new way of doing safety audits that I'm still not 100% comfortable with, but I've got some clients that are using it. The safety director's back at headquarters, and he texts the foreman on job number 1 and says, take a picture of the ladder setup and take a picture of 2 employees and text them or email them back to me within the next minute. Doesn't give them time to set it up and requires them to take those pictures. Or you can even name the employees, so you can't just pick 2 employees that are in compliance. But that's another way of doing the safety audit that some employers are finding when they have multiple job sites. It makes life a little bit easier for the safety director. But the safety director still needs to get off his rear end and out onto the job sites as much as absolutely possible. Morgan and I are familiar with a safety director for one of the members of a safety committee for one of the other trade associations I work with, and he has trouble making safety committee meetings because he's always out in the field, always out in the field. That's where he should be. That's where that safety director should be unless he's back developing programs or doing training. Training, okay, how to recognize hazards, training on all specific standards, factors that give rise to retraining. That's something you ought to have listed. This should be part of your program under training. First is going to be that list of topics we're going to train on. Then we're going to have a list of, or some bullet points on how we train hazard recognition. And folks, hazard recognition training is about 65%, maybe 70% educating employees. Hey, you're roofing employees, you're going to be up on a roof, you're going to be working at heights. Here's some pictures of the types of areas you're going to be working in or on. So these are the types of hazards you're going to accomplish. The other 35%, I'm sorry, I want to pound my desk, is distracted working, prohibiting distracted working. An employee on a roof, I don't care if it's a roofing contractor, I don't care if you're mechanical, if you're a carpenter, whatever you are, if you're a post-frame contractor, your employees should be paying 100% attention to the sights, SIGHTS, and sounds of the work environment. They shouldn't have earbuds in their ears listening to music or talk radio or anything else. Or they shouldn't be carrying on a conversation on their smartphone. Their smartphone should be back in their truck or their car or in the gang box. It shouldn't be on the job site with them. They should be paying attention so they learn the sights, what there's in their sight picture and what they're used to hearing, what it sounds like on this job site. Maybe you're putting a roof on an office complex or something that's being built and you're working on part of it and there are other contractors working on that site also. What are the sights and sounds of that job site? And they should be instructed that when that sound picture changes, when you hear a new sound introduced that you haven't heard before, stop what you're doing for a minute and look around and see what's causing that new sound. And if it looks like it's a possible hazard to you, notify your supervisor and clue them in on this so that defensive measures can be taken. That's hazard recognition training, distracted working. Okay, training on all specific standards. Those are the subpart M standards, 1926.500, 01, 501, 02, and 03. Your hazard communication standard, yes, there is. And yes, On February 5th, OSHA just proposed a whole raft of new changes to the HAZCOM standard, but primarily they're labeling directed at manufacturers. They will affect us if they go through the proposal right now. But yeah, standards like that, they apply to us. Emergency action plan, all the various standards that apply to the kind of work we do. And of course, if you're doing torch applied roofing, you want to be sure that those employees then take the CERTA training program to get CERTA safety, torch applied training safety. Factors that give rise to retraining should be listed in your program, in your training portion of your safety program. And those would be employee has to be retrained if he's gotten, maybe your safety enforcement program is a 4-step program, and the third step is a 3-day suspension without pay. And you're in the training portion of your safety program, you have listed, if you get to the third step in the safety enforcement program within the 12-month cycle, you have to go back through safety orientation. Or if you violate the same safety rule two or more times, or twice or 3 times, you have to be retrained, something along those lines. And certification of training. You test it. If they pass a test, then you certify. You don't have to give them a certificate. You could if you wanted to. Maybe when they complete orientation, you give everybody a certificate. You just graduated from Roofing 101 with ABC Company. Maybe that's great. That kind of recognition might ring well with your employees, but you need a documented certification in your files that your employees have gone through and successfully completed the training program. We always think of training and the training process, but we really need to think of focusing on learning or outcomes. That's what I've been talking about. Measurements. How do I know my training's effective? Don't forget, if OSHA, and this now, again, I keep saying OSHA. I should probably be saying OSHA and your history. The idea behind safety training and effective safety training is to eliminate altogether any injuries. If you could do the best effective safety training in the world and you had a good safety enforcement / incentive program, to the extent that your employees took ownership in safety, and you could reduce your reportables to 0. You had an OSHA 300 at the end of 2020, and you had all zeros across the bottom. Wouldn't that be great? And maybe some of you do. If you do, I would say I would attribute about 90% of that, or maybe that's too high, 80% of that to effective training, the other 20% to effective safety enforcement and reinforcement of the training. And those things like the daily pre-task plans, daily safety briefings, constantly keeping safety in front of your employees. Yes, I want your employees to be sick about hearing it, but I want you to provide it to them in such a way that they understand the necessity of it and necessity of understanding it. And part of that's encouraging them to come to you with questions as they might occur. Okay, specific training topics. This is just a list. I'm not going to read through these, but these are the basics. This is not, if you get a copy when it's issued of the MRCA safety manual template, you will find many, many, many more topics than you see here. These are just the basics. I can't think of any employee in a roofing business that doesn't need to be trained on this list of topics. But there are many, many, many more topics than this. Crane safety, all kinds of things. There are all kinds of topics. So part of your documentation is they need to be listed. We need to list all those topics as part of the program, and each topic, and then how we train under each topic, or what our safety rules are under each topic. So fall protection in your safety program, which you can draw from the template, will list the various types of fall protection you use, under what circumstances they may be used, and what the requirements are when employees need or elect to use one of those methods. That all needs to be part of that. PPE training, I put this up here separately because it's such important training in our business, because don't forget, first of all, the best fall protection in my mind is still personal fall arrest equipment. It's even better than guardrails or parapets, because there's always a small possibility somebody could trip and fall over a guardrail 41 inches high, or fall over a parapet 39 inches high. Move your hand 3 feet plus 3 inches above the floor. you can see somebody and it's in certain bizarre situations maybe, but not unimaginable situations, who could actually find themselves going over the parapet. It's acceptable, it's compliant with OSHA, but still the best is probably your personal fall arrest system. And this is the topic that we want to train our employees on PPE. And again, this should be part of the detail and training. Again, I just addressed another MRCA safety application letter. And when the question in 2020 was, describe your PPE hazard assessment, training, and auditing program. And for the training portion, the response was pretty much focused at personal fall arrest systems. That's about all they talked about. They didn't talk, and that's a unique type of training, but they never addressed respirators in the case of resprocrystalline silica or any other hazardous fume or dust that might require PPE, tight fitting, loose fitting, all those different things. That all needs to be part of your documentation. Here's a hands-on example. I put that in there just to give you an example of what I like to think what should be on hands-on. Again, this should be spelled out in your training program. When we get to the PPE for personal fall arrest systems, we're going to show part of our training there is show the employees how to wear it, let the employees practice in the presence of the instructor to get into it until they understand it and get into it correctly, and then move on to other topics. But then come back to PPE at the end of training and have the employee put on his harness again. If your training is half a day, cover the PPE close to the beginning, and then before you break for lunch, have each employee get back into their harness to make sure they remembered what you showed them and what you demonstrated and what they experienced earlier. Scope of training, you're going to cover all the critical components of the job. PPE, how to wear it, store it, maintain it, and the most important one, as far as I'm concerned, under wearing it is inspecting it. They should be trained on how to inspect their PPE and to inspect it before each use. Training orientation add-on is mentoring. If you have a mentoring program, get that documented in your safety training and your safety program. How do I set up the mentoring program? How do I select the employees who I'm going to use as mentors? And how long are they going to be mentored? And I have 90 plus days, and I just pulled that in from one of my other clients and what a client of mine, and that's what they do. I'm not suggesting you need to do that, but you need to have, if you're going to do mentoring, that's a great way, especially if you have an employee or two who are just on the verge. Let's say you have an 80% pass rate and the employee scores 80%. Or you could say any employee who doesn't get 100% pass the post-orientation test has to have a mentor for the minimum the first 30 days of their employment. Maybe all employees have a mentor for the first 2 weeks, but if they didn't score 100%, they have to have a mentor for the first 30 or 60 days. And some people have special designations. Some of my clients use special colored hard hats for new employees who are being mentored, and others have stickers they put on the hard hats where they're permitted that indicate they're being mentored. Training is never ending. Get used to it. Daily safety briefings, weekly toolbox talks, monthly safety meetings. And like I say when we talk about toolbox talks at the MRCA and my other trade associations, it's okay to repeat important topics. Perhaps, let me go back to that. Perhaps we do fall protection once a month. In hot weather, we do heat illness prevention once every 6 weeks. And then interspersed within those are other topics. Okay, the daily safety briefing, documentation, this should be documented. This client of mine I was referring to in the state of Washington, every one of their employees does a pre-task plan at the beginning of the day. And the employee describes in his pre-task plan form the work he's going to do that day. And they're no different than you. They're an installation contractor, but they do a particular task. And okay, today we're going to be installing a new roof, and I'm supposed to be working in the area identified by my foreman. And the hazards I foresee are fall hazards, dust hazards, whatever they might be. And here are the methods I'm going to take to protect myself from those hazards. And then they take that and they put it in their pocket. And they carry that around with them. And if during the day, the tasks they're going to perform change, they finish what they were assigned early and they're given new tasks, they pull it out, they put the new tasks down and they repeat the process. At the end of the day, they sign it, date it, time it, and sign it and give it to the foreman, who then turns it into the corporate safety director. And then that person at this company scans it into his computer and it's kept in an electronic file. So they always know the situation with every employee. And the JSA, by the way, is different than that. That's where another alternative, which is, I think, equally as good, where the foreman or crew leader comes to the job before work begins, scopes out the job, identifies all of his hazards, and he meets with the crew for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes before work begins in the morning, and he goes over those 5 points with them. Weekly toolbox talks, again, so very important. You're going to spend 15 to 20 minutes one time a week. Most companies like to do it on a Monday morning. Or Monday right before lunch, and you go over the topic. It gives you about 15 or 20 minutes to drill down on one particular topic. Again, I recommend that the safety director send a toolbox talk out to each crew, each foreman. He can do it electronically, or he can do it, on with an iPad or something like that, or he can do it with paper. And then that the foreman takes that toolbox talk and he covers all the points, and then every employee signs off that he attended the toolbox talk. I have some clients that the employees sign in when they begin the toolbox talk and they sign out when the toolbox talk's over. I have some clients that like to do a quiz. All of this, though, needs to be documented. But the most important thing is you keep a copy of the bullet points that the foreman covered with the crew. That is maintained and that is kept for the duration of the job. Now, these things are not like the safety orientation we were talking about earlier. These documents you keep for the duration of the job, and then they can be shredded. You don't need to keep them forever, but you definitely need to keep them for the duration of the job. Now, if you were my client, I would tell you duration of the job plus 6 months, but that's your decision. As long as you keep them for the duration of the job, you're going to be okay. Now, some of my clients, when you go back to the JSA we just talked about, they take the toolbox talk piece of paper that they were given, and you can only see my slide here, but if you were looking at what I was showing you, they take that toolbox talk, flip over the page, they make 5 columns on the page, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and that's where they record the daily safety JSA pre-job, pre-work briefing. And I actually used one of those one time years ago to get an OSHA citation vacated. My client was issued an OSHA citation where the employee was injured, claimed that he was never briefed on this hazard. And my client said, yes, he was. And we pulled it out, and there was, right in the middle was Wednesday. And that hazard was briefed by the foreman, and the employee signed off that he was present and that he'd attended that. And the OSHA area director by phone, before we even did the informal conferences, we don't need the informal, I'm vacating the citation. It's clear the employee was lying. He had been trained. He was aware of that hazard. It was a little bit away from the job site, so he was out of sight of anybody when he exposed himself to the hazard. And these things can pay dividends. You think about what you think might be angst or onerousness that you have to go through to keep those records, but think about how much you save in attorney's fees or your own time and your own cost, just if you can avoid an informal conference, or if you can get an OSHA citation knocked out before you ever have to invest any money in contesting the citation, or you save tons of money on workers' comp premiums and other costs. Monthly safety, quarterly safety meeting, review prior months in safety company-wide, review what happened during the last month. The safety director usually does these. And then you consider demonstrations such as on fall protection equipment, power-driven equipment, maybe you bring a kettle in, you go over kettle safety, whatever, but you do demonstrations and you spend maybe an hour and a half once a month to cover that sort of thing. Again, documenting everything you've done. Ongoing training, hazard assessments, construction. During the bidding process, you identify the hazards. Whenever change order is approved, you re-identify the hazards. Whenever new equipment's added, you identify the hazards with the new equipment. Whenever new contractor comes on site, you identify those hazards and you document those, and then you document the fact that you pulled all the people together who are going to be exposed to those new hazards, and you've trained them with regards to those potential new hazards. There you've got the documented training signed off by those employees at the beginning, as soon as those, before those new hazards enter the job site. Training following enforcement action. Every time, if you have a safety enforcement program, and gosh, I hope you all do. If you don't, I don't know that, don't hold out a lot of hope for your safety culture, I guess. But if you have training, enforcement action, following enforcement, if you have an enforcement program, I'm sorry, I got my tongue-tied. We have an enforcement program. Every time we issue safety enforcement action, whether it's a verbal warning, a written warning, whatever, you retrain the employee on that issue. Before you let them go back to work, I see an employee without a hard hat. I pull him aside and say, "Hey, Joe, this is your verbal warning. You get 2 more bites at the apple. The 4th one, you're terminated. You'll lose your job." Okay, this is just a verbal. I'm telling you this verbally, but it's going to go on your record. It'll be expunged at the end of the year, but right now it's going on your record. And now we're going to sit down. I'm going to go back over why it's important that you wear your helmet, how to properly wear it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's documented. That needs to be documented and put in the person's file with the note of a verbal warning. Same thing, written warning, same thing with 3 days off without pay. Of course, we're not going to have to retrain them if they've been terminated, but everything, other type of training, we're going to provide that necessary documentation. Importance of compliance in all areas, et cetera. Training records, these are the records you're going to keep. The topic of every safety meeting, an outline of the material covered in the safety meeting in detail. And this only, if it's a toolbox talk or the monthly safety meeting, just the safety director puts this together, but he or she keeps a copy of that detail and then a copy of each sign-in sheet from each job site where the toolbox talk was done. Start time and end time. We started the toolbox talk at 11:30 a.m. Toolbox talk ended at 11:45 a.m. Okay. Sign-in sheet and a sign-out sheet. And if you're going to do a test, if you do a test, then you need the result of the quiz they took. And if they didn't do well in the quiz, then you need to also document the fact that you sat down with them and went over the material they missed. Your records, new hire orientation, materials covered, method used to train. I mentioned some of this at the beginning. Length of training session, each topic if possible. We spent 2 hours on fall protection, a half hour on hazard communication, an hour on kettle safety, whatever, however you break it down. Name of each employee in attendance, confirmation they attended the entire session, and then the test and the procedure that you follow if they fail the test. Weekly toolbox talks, I've already mentioned that. Date, topic, instructor, quiz, and whether they passed or failed it. And if they failed it, what did you do? What did you do? And what you should do is, if they failed, I sat down with that employee and went over the material till I was satisfied he understood it. New project safety orientation. We talked about that briefly a few slides ago. The date you do it, the topics covered. And that date should, by the way, be before the employees begin work on the new project. Topics covered, that would be the job safety analysis that the safety director performed on that job before, possibly at the time of the bid, or at least before work began. He or she went up there, evaluated a job, and did their pre-job safety analysis. Specific rules that will be applied in the project, who the instructor was that did the training, employees in attendance. Daily safety briefings, we've already talked about. This is in the morning. That you're going to do before they start work. Monthly safety briefing, the date, employees sign in before and after, topics covered, start and finish, and the quiz, again, whether or not they took the quiz. And if it's a pass-fail quiz, did they pass it or fail it? I know the monthly safety quizzes, I'd like you to keep copies of the quizzes with the documentation, again, for the duration of the project. At the end of the project, get rid of it all. And again, the safety director can scan the papers into his or her computer, so then you can destroy the paper. But I'd like you to keep a copy of that until the end of the project at a minimum. As I indicated, I'd like you to keep it at least 6 months beyond that. Annual safety meeting, I call it a safety briefing. This can be a fun day for people. You give out safety awards in your safety incentive program. You cover some interesting topic. You do some interesting demonstrations. I represent a power company, and I know Line Clearance Tree Trimming Company, they pull all their people together once a year in what they call their traveling safety trailer. and they go through all these demonstrations of electricity, the dangers of electricity, because they're doing line clearance, tree trimming. They punch a little pinhole about this. If you imagine the tip of a needle-sized hole in the end of a I forget the rating on the rubber gloves that employees wear when they're doing working with breakers and things like that. And then they put a hot dog in there, and then they touch it to a hot line, and they show that, and they do it with a hot dog in a finger that was not punctured and one with punctured, and they fry that hot dog in no time flat. Those kinds of fun things that people remember, and they pay attention to them, and they hit home with them. And that's it, Morgan. And I think I've got about 5 minutes left for questions, if anybody has any. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but before I end completely, please remember that you do have the MRCA Safety Legal Services Plan, and that entitles you to a phone call, conference call, or a short email that I can answer quickly to either me or one of my partners. And this is on safety or on any business or employment law related issue. You get that one free call a week as an MRCA member, or month, I'm sorry, one free call a month as an MRCA member every year. You can't carry them forward, because I usually tell people, I have some guys that call me the last day of the month and then they call me the first day of the next month. That's legal. But please, if you don't want to ask me a question now, remember, shoot me an email or pick up the phone and call me. My phone number's here. I'm going to give you all my cell phone numbers. Right now it's 937-673-4602. So if you don't want to ask a question today, you feel free to call me and I'll answer your question for you on the phone. That'll be your monthly MRCA Legal Services Plan call. Now I'll shut up. Okay, Morgan. Morgan? Morgan? Morgan?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, Randy said, please speak about DART and its relevance.
Okay, the DART number. Which Randy is that? I hope it's Randy Adams. Oh, that son of a Randy Adams, you son of a gun. That's got nothing to do with training. The DART number is the disabled away from work and restricted duty number. That's a number that again can be used to measure the effectiveness of your safety training. It's something you draw from the OSHA 300s. I love things like the DART number and the LWDI, lost work days, injury index. I prefer that people just look at the OSHA 300, because the OSHA 300 itself those numbers are taken from the 300, but the 300's got the information you really need to determine whether you're not effectively training people in a particular area. You look at your 300, and if you see, this is a fixed situs industry, one of my clients, but they had a number of minor injuries, but they were all on pinch points where they went back and reevaluated their machine guarding, and then they reevaluated their interlock system and found out their interlock system wasn't working and employees were bypassing some of the guards. And that's why they were getting caught in these pinch points with these pinch type injuries that required, they reported them and they got first aid. So they were able to go back and remedy that problem. You don't get that from the DART index or the LWDI. You get that from looking at the 300 and looking at the nature of the injury and what the employee was doing when the injury occurred. So that's what the DART is. But again, I strongly, for this purposes of this presentation, for training, effectiveness of training, I suggest you look at the 300s.
Okay. You mentioned medical records and your basic training topics. What do we need to tell our employees regarding this topic? This is from Mark.
It's not medical, it's access to medical records. There's an OSHA standard, folks. If you've never recognized it, and don't ask me the number off the top of my head. There's an OSHA standard that tells you that you have to train your employees when they are hired and annually on the fact that they have the right of access to any medical or exposure records you maintain on them because of their employment with your company. The medical records are medical surveillance records. Now, in roofing, we probably don't have very many situations where we have to keep medical surveillance records. But if you have employees who are working and get involved in working on kind of lead work. If you've got employees who are dealing with respirable crystalline silica above a certain level, or asbestos abatement work, or exposure to asbestos, you may run into a situation where you have to do medical surveillance. Now, one record though is if you have to employees who have to wear tight-fitting respirators, you've got to put them through. Look at 1910, which does apply to construction. It's referenced into the construction standards. 1910.134 that gives you the medical questionnaires, et cetera, that you have to maintain on employees before they're permitted to wear a tight-fitting respirator. And the exam that you have to refer them to a doctor, and they have to have a pulmonary function test. Those are all the kinds of records an employee has free access to anytime they want to see them. You've got to give them that training, cover all that information in orientation, the details, and then you have to remind them of that annually. The annual retraining you can accomplish, and what I recommend to my clients is this: everybody gets, no matter when they're hired, let's just pick a date, October 1st, everybody gets handed in their pay envelope, or even if they get direct deposits, maybe you hand it out to each employee, but you hand them a piece of paper that somebody can certify that it was done, that just says, this is a reminder for your annual reminder that you have free access to your medical and exposure records maintained, since Randy Adams asked the question, at R. Adams Roofing. These can be secured by seeing the company safety director or calling him at this number, and he will either mail or provide you a copy of those records, or you can come into the office on your own time, not company time, on your own time, and review those records, and then we'll produce them for you, and you're entitled to one free copy of those records. And that's in the little handout you give them, and then you satisfied the retraining requirement. But then you got to keep a record, the fact that you handed it out and everybody got it. So even if I'm hired on September 15th, I get that reminder on October 1st, and that gets me in the cycle. So on October 1st, then I'm doing my annual training that way.
Okay, I think that's it for, I think that's it for questions. Housekeeping, we are going to begin having a word or phrase that we would like you to email to me in the event that you need to watch this webinar post-recording. So if you're here live, you do not need to take any action. So if you're watching this post-recording, please email me with the phrase roofing safety, and we'll make sure you get credit for today's webinar. Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, with instructor Matt McCreary of Safety Resources out of Indianapolis, Indiana, with the topic of Low Slope Safety Best Practices Part 1. Gary, thank you for today's presentation, and thank you everyone for being here today. We look forward to seeing you again on March 23rd. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Morgan. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Thank you. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.